My recipe for blueberry cobbler with pie crust using frozen berries is going to be amazing. I've been making a lot of cobblers and dumplings recipes lately, so I decided why not try blueberries. I know for the strawberry one I did recently, I just thawed the frozen berries and then assembled the cobbler, and it was great. But thinking back to the mixed berry dumplings that I made, as well as the blackberry cobbler, not sure when that video will be up. I'm gonna first cook these berries on the stove. I think it does something to them. So even though it is an extra step, it's still an easy recipe. Here in this pot, I have 24 ounces or 3 cups, 680 grams of frozen wild blueberries. I really like wild blueberries because I feel like they have more blueberry flavor, but if you want to use regular, that's totally fine. I'm going to add some lemon. Here I have a little over 1 teaspoon of lemon zest. Honestly, I think it's probably 1 1/4 or 1 1/3 teaspoons, but honestly, if you just round down to 1 teaspoon, you should be fine. I'm just going to add that to the berries. And these blueberries are still frozen. I did not thaw them. I'm going to cook them on the stove top, so really there's no need to thaw them first. I'm also going to add some freshly squeezed lemon juice. I am using 2 tablespoons. I'm going to add some sugar too, 3/4 cup, or as I measure it, 160 grams of white sugar. I've never made this recipe before. We're learning together, so I'll taste it and see if it needs more. I'm also going to add some water, 1/2 cup to start out with. I know it seems odd adding water to berries, but if you cook berries, you do have to add a little bit of water if you cook the berries before putting together your cobbler, because if you don't, they're going to run out of liquid before they get soft and they're going to burn. The other 1/4 cup I'm going to later on mix with 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 20 grams to make a slurry. And also, almost forgot, 1/8 teaspoon of salt. All I'm going to do is turn on the heat to high and stir it around to combine and defrost and bring it to a boil. As you can see, the berries are now boiling, so I'm going to take them down from high heat, gas mark 6 out of 6, to medium heat, gas mark 3 out of 6. It took maybe 10 minutes. Now I'm going to boil the blueberries for another 10 minutes on medium heat. I tasted them, and even though they're really good, and some people might be okay with the amount of sweetness, I think I'm going to add a little more sugar. I'm going to start off with a tablespoon. And like I said, I've never made this before, so I'm going to add a little bit at a time. Another tablespoon. I'm going to mix it in. Then I'm going to try it, and I will tell you how much sugar I use. I have a feeling I'm going to end up adding an additional 4 tablespoons, 3 more after this one, to get to a full cup of sugar, but we'll see. My blueberries have now been boiling on medium heat, gas mark 3 out of 6 for 10 minutes, so I'm going to turn off the heat. I added a total of 2 tablespoons of sugar in addition to the 3/4 cup I added in the beginning. Honestly, I tasted it multiple times, and I can't really decide what I want to do. I think it's good. A lot of people would have thought it was fine at 3/4 cup. I think you could take it all the way up to 1 cup. I might end up adding a little bit more. We'll see. I'm kind of indecisive. That's one of my character flaws. I need to work on that. But honestly, I think this, for some reason, a lot of people would be satisfied with different amounts of sweetness. And now for the cornstarch slurry. Here I have the leftover 1/4 cup of water. Here I have 2 tablespoons or 20 grams of cornstarch. I'm going to mix that into the water. I know you might be asking, Parnell, why didn't you just add the cornstarch to the berries? Well, you cannot add cornstarch to a warm liquid. You have to add it to a cold or room temperature liquid and then add it to the warm liquid. And I also did not add it in the beginning because if you boil cornstarch too long, it can actually lose its thickening power. So that's why I'm adding it now. The heat is off and I'm adding the cornstarch slurry. Gonna mix this in. It's going to thicken up nicely once it's in the oven. Now that this is done, I'm going to start assembling the cobbler. I'm going to set the oven to 350 Fahrenheit. My recipe for blueberry cobbler includes dumplings or little pieces of pie dough inside of the berry filling itself. Dumplings are characteristic of a lot of southern cobblers. If you don't like them, you could definitely just do a bottom crust, the filling, and then a top crust, and it would be delicious. But I really like that contrast and texture, so I'm going to add some dumplings. Here I have my first of 2 9-inch pie crusts. 1 9-inch I'll put on top, 1 9-inch crust I'm going to use for the dumplings. Of course, I'm using my homemade crust, but you can use store-bought. I went through and I just cut it into strips that are about 1 inch thick, some a little thinner, some a little wider, doesn't matter. And now I'm just going to take my knife and go through and cut the strips into smaller pieces. Honestly, like I said, if some are bigger or smaller than others here, I'll make them smaller. Totally fine. And I am going to just add them to the cooked blueberries. Now that I've gotten some dumplings in, I'm just going to mix them into the berries. I know it may seem odd cooking the berries when I'm just going to cook them again when they're in the oven, but considering the dumpling recipe I made recently and the other cobbler, I made the blackberry cobbler. Once again, not sure when that recipe video will be up. In contrast to the strawberry cobbler I made, in which I just defrosted the berries, mixed them with sugar and cornstarch and put them in. I think that cooking the berries first does something to them. And if you look at a lot of southern cobbler recipes, if they have a pie crust, not a cakey crust, not a dump cake style in which you use self-rising flour and sugar or cake mix or something like that, and you just dump everything into the pan. If a cobbler uses pie crust, almost all the southern recipes call for cooking the fruit first. Like I said, I don't know why, but I think it does something to the fruit. I think it concentrates the flavors. So I'm going to see how this turns out. I tasted that multiple times, and the frozen blueberries are now in an absolutely delicious filling. Now it's time to start putting together the blueberry cobbler. Here I have an 8x8 casserole dish that is buttered, and I'm going to pour in the blueberries and dumplings mixture. I actually added 2 more tablespoons of sugar, so this recipe in total has 1 cup, or as I measure, 210 grams of white sugar. I honestly thought I was going to add that much in the beginning, but as I always say, you can add more later, but you cannot take away. The last step in my recipe for blueberry cobbler is to put on the top. I'm going to do a lattice top, but you could definitely just take a 9-inch pie crust, put it on top, cut some slits so that the steam can escape, sprinkle it with sugar, and be done. But like I said, I like the look of a lattice top on a cobbler. Here's my other 9-inch pie crust, and as you can see, I've started cutting the crust into strips about an inch thick, but honestly, I'm not measuring, so some are a little bit wider than others. Now, all I'm going to do is take the strips and put them across the cobbler. You can see that this is longer than I need, so I'm just gonna trim off the excess. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to put them as far apart as they are wide. Nice and easy. I know some people like to weave the strips together, but honestly, I think that is going to be difficult because the filling is so liquidy. Then here on the end, I'm going to actually, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to do there. Get an extra strip there. Now I'm going to go over just like this. Could start at the edge, but here I'm gonna start in. My last thing that I do before putting fruit pies or cobblers into the oven is that I sprinkle them with sugar. Usually 2 tablespoons. I only have 1 tablespoon here, I forgot the other. So what I'm going to do is just take this in my hand. As you can see, I have some leftover pie crust. I may have to do something with that later. Actually, maybe I'll add a thin strip over here. That sounds like a good idea. I love pie crust, especially my homemade pie crust. I do something different. I do a half butter, half canola oil crust. So it has a lot of flavor, but not so much flavor that it competes with the pie. Everyone always says, Parnell, that pie crust is the best crust I've ever had. So if you haven't seen that video, be sure you check it out. Now that everything is done, I'm going to take my first tablespoon of sugar and sprinkle it over the top. Some is going to get into the berry filling, but that's okay. Now I'm going to get my other tablespoon of sugar, and after I do that, I'm going to put this into a 350 degree oven for, I'm guessing, 50 minutes, but I'll let you know. And I'm going to put it on top of a pizza pan so that if it boils over, it doesn't ruin the bottom of my oven. I just pulled my blueberry cobbler out of the oven. It was in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for 50 minutes. 50. As you can see, the filling boiled up a bit more than with the peach cobbler that I did recently, but it still looked great and I couldn't wait to dig in. And when I finally did try it, I realized that my recipe for blueberry cobbler with pie crust was the best. Honestly, what I liked most about this was the intense blueberry flavor. Although I'm sure that normal frozen blueberries would be just fine in this cobbler, frozen wild blueberries have a ton of flavor. I would say that they're a bit sweeter and have more of a blueberry flavor than normal blueberries do. I know that doesn't make sense, but trust me, there's definitely a difference. And just like with the blueberry pie recipe I did in the summer of 2020, the bit of lemon in the background in this cobbler was exceptional. I pretty much always add lemon to any berry recipe because lemon complements and accentuates berry flavors. This recipe for blueberry cobbler was no exception, and this time I'm glad I added both lemon zest and lemon juice. Because like I said, wild blueberries or just blueberries in general, when they're cooked, the flavor is really concentrated. So I feel like for this cobbler, I needed both the juice and the zest to help balance out the flavor. I was also happy with the amount of sweetness. This, believe it or not, was actually my first time ever making a blueberry cobbler in my entire life. Before making something for the first time, I do a lot of research. I try to see what other people do, what I think would work and what wouldn't work, and I change things to suit my personal tastes. That's why at the beginning of the video, I was so indecisive in regards to the amount of sugar. But honestly, I think 1 cup of sugar was absolutely perfect. So this blueberry cobbler recipe just goes to show that if you're making something for the first time, especially if it's an experiment, taste it as you go along. And it's always easier to add more later than to try to take away. Honestly, the blueberry flavor and the sweetness level were absolutely perfect, as was the pie crust. The pie crust on top was nice and crispy, and the pie crust dumplings inside were soft. So there was a great combination in flavors and textures. Although this is delicious on its own, this old-fashioned recipe for blueberry cobbler is the best because it's great plain or, as you can see here, with some vanilla ice cream. As I'm sure you can tell, I was really pleased with how this cobbler turned out. It's definitely in the top 3, along with the peach cobbler and the blackberry cobbler. And best of all, since this recipe calls for frozen blueberries, you can make this at any time of the year. All you need is frozen berries, pie crust, some sugar, and you can have a delicious cobbler in the summer or for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or just because. So if you make this, let me know. I know you'll love it just as much as I did. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.